you may say Democrats, if in the long run, actually, they may aim at the same thing. They want a democratic Hong Kong, but just that they have a different path to reach that. But actually, all their paths are now actually blocked. So they are all blocked. There's no way we can reach it under the present situation. So I would say that their differences now are insignificant. Therefore, we should work together, the two systemers, self-determinants, and the independents. The democracy of Hong Kong, we are at stage 6. We should be very near to stage 7, but it's so near, but yet so far. And so what should we do? I think the only thing we can do is to continue our civil resistance, and also it's important that we must remain this civil resilience, continue our struggle, not to give up. Now, further, I have to modify Bill Moyer's model, his model of the stage 8, as we could not reach even stage 7. So how can we reach the stage 8 of consolidating achievement? So I would modify this that we have to continue to struggle. So the thing we are doing now in Hong Kong, building up the democratic culture in Hong Kong, may, in the long run, I've said that maybe what we are now doing in Hong Kong may not have any impact on the change in China. Maybe we still can have some change. That what happened in China may also, the crossroad of China is influencing Hong Kong's crossroad. Maybe the crossroad of Hong Kong may also influence the crossroad of China. How that can happen? The first thing is that looking back to the history of Hong Kong, the role of Hong Kong in the change in China, that Hong Kong has always been an incubation ground for new ideas. So maybe Hong Kong can continue to play this role through our own practices of democracy, and it can be a shelter for dissidents from mainland, and it may also be a bridgehead for change in China in the future. Though I cannot be very sure how these three things actually happen, but just that I believe that if we continue, be resilient in our own work, in doing our own democracy in some way, though I cannot figure out how, but just that I still believe that we can bring change in China. I like the name of this room. Do you know the name of this room? Optimus. And end this my presentation by the name of this room. Thank you.
Great. So wonderful presentations. My only objection is Professor Tai stole my joke with the optimist room. I didn't say something, but it was good. Yeah, good joke. So what I thought I'd do is just I wanted to pose one question to lead off, and then would like to open it to the room for questions. So this is a question generally to all three speakers, and it draws on something that I think came in Professor Ma's presentation about sort of the idea of this notion of performance legitimacy, and how the old way of thinking about Hong Kong was about economic performance and sort of non-democratic markers of legitimacy. And also, I study the mainland. That's also very much the way the mainland is trying to justify its legitimacy through its stability and economic performance and nationalist pride and these sorts of things. At the same time, also globally, with democracy, there's a lot of disillusionment with democracy. Certainly here in the US, there's a little bit of, for reasons I won't mention, but there's some disillusionment with democracy. And as your slides show, there's a lot of dissatisfaction in some of the older democratic countries. So just in this debate between democracy and performance legitimacy, I would love to hear your thoughts on how much, there's democratic movements going on, but how much traction is this, what you framed as an old idea of performance legitimacy, how much power is that argument having within Hong Kong, and how much of a challenge is that to the democratic advocacy?
I should start. You hear me okay, right? Is it on?
No, I think they need to hear you.
Okay. I didn't have time to present all the data, but actually the general assessment of other aspects of performance of Hong Kong is okay in terms of like equality, provision of services, especially the substantive parts are okay. But I think more and more people are disappointed with like procedural justice in recent years. But I do believe that actually the two are kind of complementary. Complementary in the sense that you can not only have substantive performance, but some people would be happy, content with kind of provision of social goods, etc., etc. But then as people become more and more educated, they begin to think that all these procedural justice stuff is actually very important. So I think Hong Kong is, at this stage, people are more and more unhappy about, say, the damage to rule of law, the injustice of the system, etc., etc. And then in recent years, I can see them, more and more people began to attribute that to the lack of democracy in Hong Kong. That is one part of the political process or value change process that has been happening in the last 10 years or so. So I think the current situation is that there is very little, as I think Danny will testify to that. It seems that people who want to change the system have very few institutional means to do so, and then very few feasible and very hopeful strategies to do so. A lot of people keep plugging at it, but of course we keep plugging at it, but it doesn't sound very hopeful. So this is I think the current situation. But I do think that actually if the procedural legitimacy problem is not solved, then it is, and especially because of the influence of China, a lot of it is going to worsen. Then actually it is going to hurt the general legitimacy of the whole government.
Actually, I may not be directly answering your question, but I'm just responding to the kind of disillusion you mentioned about democracy. And I think Hong Kong may be able to get a benefit as a late developer, that we can learn from the mistakes of the early practitioners of democracy, so the pogroms we see in the States now. That's why, and I understand democracy is not just kind of a competitive elections, and that's why in the umbrella movement we have, the Occupy movement or the umbrella movement, that's the two different things. The Occupy, we have introduced the deliberation days. Actually, we have introduced the deliberative democracy into the process. And now this deliberative ideas have in some way infiltrated into the civil society of Hong Kong. That in deciding like the recent issue concerning the co-location controversy in Hong Kong about the express rail, where they will have the custom check at the same place, that the civil society group put forward an alternative proposal to the government. And there are so different views among the civil society groups. So they have organized another deliberation day, and then they reach an agreement to that will be the alternative. So this kind of deliberative democracy is now practicing in the civil society. That's why in my presentation I don't have the time to elaborate that. The civil society in Hong Kong is very strong and very active. And that's also why I can be optimistic.
On performance legitimacy, I think the question is now becoming more complex, because when we talk about performance legitimacy, traditionally we have been focusing on the Hong Kong government alone. But now I think that after 20 years of the handover, you can see that performance legitimacy can be analyzed at least 3 levels. Beijing's performance itself, because if you take a look at a lot of surveys conducted by Mahawk and other scholars, Hong Kong people are very sensitive to Beijing's performance, economically and politically. And the second level is Beijing's policy towards Hong Kong. And then the final level is the Hong Kong government's performance itself. So I think in the future, these 3 tiers of performance legitimacy will affect the patterns of democratization in Hong Kong.
So I think we have time for maybe one or two questions, right? So, yeah, please.
Thank you. I have